Today I'm going to finish my discussion of the War of 1812, specifically some of the key battles that took place during the latter part of the war and its impact, how the war will affect America in the years that follow. Once America declared war in the summer of 1812, England largely ignored that declaration. Keep in mind, England was very occupied with this ongoing war in Europe against France and Napoleon. So our declaration of war in 1812 was of very little concern, relatively little concern to England, so they kind of largely ignored it. That will change in the spring of 1814. England will finally divert its full attention toward this war in the United States. And the reason for this is that Napoleon will suffer his first major defeat in Leipzig in the latter part of 1813. And of course, a lot of his forces will surrender by the spring of 1814. Leipzig is a town in what is today Germany. So this major defeat of Napoleon at this time is going to free up a large part of England's army to now be diverted to the war in the United States. So with the war in Europe pretty much coming to an end, England now can divert its resources and, more importantly, its military toward the United States. And what they do is they plan to launch a three-pronged attack on the United States in an attempt to bring a swift end to this war of 1812, this war against the United States. Keep in mind, England is very frustrated and tired of this war that's raged in Europe for so many years. It's been going on for about 25 years at this point. England is ready to stop fighting, so they have no desire to be embroiled in a long, drawn-out war in America. So when they come here, when the British troops show up in America, they fully intend on bringing a swift end to this war. And to do that, they launch a three-pronged attack. They will attempt to invade New England from Canada, the Chesapeake Bay, and New Orleans. So three major areas will be their focus once they start attacking the United States. Looking at the map here, we can see these blue arrows indicate the British offensive operations beginning in the spring of 1814. Their attempt to invade New England from Canada will fail. U.S. naval forces, keep in mind, if you remember our discussion earlier, had already gained control of the Great Lakes area, to include Lake Champlain here, and this is where the U.S. Navy will stop the British advance, forcing British forces to retreat back into Canada, and this is in the fall of 1814, September 1814. At the same time, the British are attempting to invade New England. A separate British force is invading the Chesapeake Bay area, and they'll attack Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And that's where we're going to discuss now, this invasion of the Chesapeake Bay. And this, of course, is in August and September of 1814, the same time they're attempting to invade New England. When British troops arrive in Washington, D.C., their goal is not to capture the city or to control the city. Their intent is more or less to just destroy the city and move on, to cut off the head of the nation. You basically destroy the nation's capital, and you pretty much will end the war very quickly. And this is an assumption on the part of the British. Keep in mind too, these troops that land in the Chesapeake Bay, they are war weary. They've been fighting in Europe for several years. Some of them, for many years. They're ready to go home. Once Napoleon was defeated, a lot of these guys were looking forward to, okay, the war is over, Napoleon's defeated, we're getting ready to go home to our families, and then their commander tells them, okay, we're not going home, men, we're going to America, we're going to fight a war there. And the British troops are like, what? This is ridiculous. We should be going home. These guys are frustrated, and they're angry, and they want to go home. They don't want to be fighting in America. So when they get here, they're going to unleash that frustration and that anger on Washington, D.C. And essentially the entire city of Washington, D.C. is going to be burned to the ground. Well, with the exception of very few buildings, the entire city will be destroyed. Taking a look at some illustrations here. Here, of course, an artist's portrayal of British troops burning the city of Washington, D.C. They're pretty much just burning everything in sight. They're not trying to take prisoners. They're not trying to control territory. They're just trying to destroy the city and move on. One interesting little piece of trivia: as British troops moved toward the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C. Patent, and part of this is urban legend, part of it is fact. The patent clerk rushes out to greet these British troops as they're marching up the steps of the patent office, and he pleads with them, begs them not to destroy the patent office. The patent office is, while technically it's a government building, it has no military significance, it has no political significance. It is simply a repository of knowledge, plans and designs for various inventions and so forth. So he begs them not to destroy this patent office because it would destroy. It was unnecessarily destruction of knowledge. And as luck would have it, the British officer in charge is like, fine, whatever, and he has his men to move on down the street to the next building. Just kind of a random chance that they were able to avoid the destruction of this patent office because of the pleadings of this clerk. Other places in Washington, D.C. will not fare quite so well. In particular, the presidential mansion will be one of the prime targets for British destruction. And this is as an example of how quickly this all took place. On the evening of August 24th, 1814, President Madison and his wife had just sat down to dinner. Soldier comes rushing in. Mr. President, we need to evacuate. The British are attacking. He's like, yes, soldier, I know. The British are attacking the city. I've already been informed. He's like, no, sir. They're on the front lawn. They're coming in the door any minute. And the president is, whoa, I had no idea. So basically, the president and his wife rush out the back door of the White House, running for their lives, literally running for their lives. The president clutching a copy of the Declaration of Independence as they escape. They run out of town, and they end up hiding for about 3 days in a barn on the outskirts of town. So this is hard to imagine in today's world. The president and his wife fleeing for their lives out the White House as an enemy army invades. But this is exactly what happened on this evening in August in 1814. So the president and his wife escape, capture, and of course the mansion, the presidential mansion, will be burned to the ground. What happens though is that, and this is again another example of how fast this whole thing unfolded. The British officers who were first into the house, they found the president's dinner still warm on the table. And so they sat down to eat. They ate the president's dinner, and then of course they ordered the destruction of the president's mansion. And all this unfolds in a matter of minutes. So this is this is very quickly that all this transpires. Of course, here another image of the presidential mansion. The following day, the main structure and foundation remained intact. The house was gutted by the fire, of course. The house will be rebuilt and refurbished in the months that follow the war. The main structure was constructed out of granite, and of course it was unpainted. But they were unable to remove all the soot stains from the fire. So in an attempt to refurbish the house, they simply painted the granite white. And this is where the presidential mansion gets its name, the White House, as a result of the refurbishment after this destructive fire. The nation's Capitol building, where Congress convenes, suffered a similar fate. As you can see here, the Capitol building was not yet finished. The dome, the distinctive dome on the Capitol, had not yet been constructed, but Congress was still meeting here, and because it was still an important structure, the British decided to burn it And again, it will be reconstructed and refurbished the same way the presidential mansion was. So Washington, D.C. is burned, and there's very little resistance offered to this British invasion of the nation's capital. There were very few troops stationed in Washington. There was a militia assigned to protect Washington, D.C., but most of these troops were very young, very inexperienced, and of course they had no training. And at the first sign of British troops, burning and destroying the city, a lot of these soldiers just turned and ran. Now, normally we don't think of American soldiers as running, fleeing away from a battle, but you have to realize that a lot of these troops were not real soldiers. They were just citizens who were organized into a militia at the last minute to defend the city, and they were just not prepared for this kind of battle. In fact, the only American soldiers who did any real fighting in and around the D.C. area was a small Coast Guard unit who tried to delay the British troops as they marched into D.C. They, of course, eventually had to retreat as well. But the British troops will face very little resistance as they march into the nation's capital. And this kind of gives them a false sense of that victory is imminent. The ease with which they burned the capital kind of suggests to them that the rest of this war will be just as easy. They're going to be in for a little bit of a surprise as they move up the Chesapeake Bay and attempt to attack the city of Baltimore, which is protected by an army fort called Fort McHenry. And again, just to take another look at the map here, Baltimore is just a few miles upstream from Washington, D.C., still on the Chesapeake Bay. So just a few days after D.C. is destroyed, British troops move further up the bay and attempt to attack the city of Baltimore. And their intention is the same with Baltimore. They're just going to try to destroy it. The intention here is that if they can control this Chesapeake Bay area, they can cut the nation in half and use it as a staging and reinforcing to bring in more troops, more supplies, and they can possibly control a significant portion of the nation from this location. That's their main plan. It doesn't quite work out the way they intended, though, because Fort McHenry guards the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. So as the ships move up through the Chesapeake Bay, the approach to Baltimore Harbor is guarded by this Fort McHenry, which is on a small peninsula that sticks out into the Chesapeake Bay. The British Navy can't simply sail past Fort McHenry to get to Baltimore. They have to, because the fort is too well armed and it's well defended, and it could really wreak havoc on the British fleet if they just try to sail past. So they must destroy this fort in order to gain access to Baltimore. It's a little bit easier said than done. They begin this is September 13th. It's about a couple weeks after the attack on D.C. The British start a bombardment of Fort McHenry, and this bombardment lasts all day, all through the night, and into the next day. So it's about 25 hours worth of constant bombardment on this small fort, McHenry. Now, as luck would have it, a young Baltimore lawyer who had a few days earlier been captured by a British patrol just happens to be held prisoner on one of these British ships that's attacking Fort McHenry. And this Baltimore lawyer, a guy named Francis Scott Key, he has a unique situation here where he can observe this battle as it unfolds from his position on this British ship. And of course, here this artist has portrayed Key observing this battle as it unfolds all through the day, on through the night, and into the next morning. And Key is particularly inspired by the presence of the U.S. flag over Fort McHenry. He's so impressed by this. He writes a poetic tribute to this battle, and of course we know it as the Star Spangled Banner, which is our current national anthem. All the lyrics of the Star Spangled Banner refer to this battle at Fort McHenry, particularly how impressed Key was that the flag was still waving over the fort following the battle, and indicating that the fort had not surrendered. This when you hear the words of the national anthem, it's referring specifically to this battle, and of course the flag which flew over Fort McHenry. In fact, if you're ever in Washington D.C., you can go to the Smithsonian, and you can see the actual flag that was flying over Fort McHenry during this battle in the War of 1812. Here it is, of course. It's all battle worn and torn, and holes and so forth from the damage caused during the battle. Another little piece of trivia: the Star Spangled Banner was originally written as a poem, tributizing this battle and the heroic soldiers at Fort McHenry. It'll later be put to music, and it'll become kind of the unofficial national anthem for many years. Finally, in 1931, Congress will pass legislation making the Star Spangled Banner our official national anthem. And it's just kind of an interesting origin story of something that we are very familiar with today. So the Battle of Chesapeake Bay was kind of a mixed result for the British. They were able to destroy Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, but they were unable to make it to Baltimore, which is what they really wanted. They wanted to control that port. Their failure to destroy Fort McHenry forced them to withdraw from the Chesapeake area, and this ends up being kind of a mixed defeat / victory. So it was pretty much a wash here. We lost the city of New Orleans, but we were able to prevent them from taking the port of Baltimore. So it was kind of a draw here in the Battle of Chesapeake. The Battle of New Orleans, probably the most famous battle of the War of 1812. This was going to take place a few months after the Battle of the Chesapeake. A separate British force will attempt to invade the southern United States through the port of New Orleans. Again, their goal here, look at our map, their goal here is to control the port of New Orleans and of course the Mississippi River. Their hope is that if they can do this, they can cut off the Mississippi River or our access to the river and the port of New Orleans. Then they can kind of put a stranglehold on our frontier economy, and of course it gives them access to the frontier as well. In the event of a protracted war, New Orleans will be an important point to control. What ends up happening, though, is that Andrew Jackson is going to be the defender, or in charge of the force defending New Orleans. Andrew Jackson, at this point, he's a prominent member of Tennessee society. He's not. This is, of course, quite a few years from his presidency. We'll talk more about Jackson when we get to his presidency. But at this point, Jackson is simply commanding the Tennessee and Kentucky militia as they attempt to defend New Orleans from British attack. So while the British never revealed their intent to attack New Orleans, everybody pretty much knew that this was where they were headed. It's an obvious target. So Congress and, of course, the U.S. military knew that this was going to be a place that we would need to defend. So Andrew Jackson is ordered to assemble Kentucky and Tennessee militia and move to New Orleans in order to defend that from British attack. And British forces are going to be attacking out of their bases in the Caribbean. Keep in mind, England still has several colonies in the Caribbean islands. So this is where they're going to launch their attack. On his way to New Orleans, Jackson is going to detour into what is today Alabama to put down an uprising of the Creek Indians at a place called Horseshoe Bend. From there, he's going to move into western Florida, into the Florida Panhandle, because he suspects that the British troops out of the Caribbean will attempt to land here first in order to reorganize and stage their assault on New Orleans. So by Jackson's invasion of western Florida, he kind of prevents the British from using it as a staging area, forcing them to move directly into New Orleans from the Caribbean. It'll cause the British Army to delay their invasion, and it'll give Jackson enough time to get over to New Orleans and set up his defense. This is where it gets kind of interesting. When Jackson gets to New Orleans, he finds the city in relative chaos. At this point, word has reached New Orleans that the British are planning an invasion, and the people there are in a kind of a state of panic, including the political leadership of New Orleans, the mayor and the town council. Everybody is in a kind of a panic, and they're ready to surrender to the British. And like, when the British get here, we're just going to surrender to them because we don't want to get burned to the ground like they did in Washington, D.C. So people here are ready to just kind of run up the white flag and surrender. When Jackson realizes this, he's outraged. Andrew Jackson is a fighter. He's not one to shy away from a battle. And as we get more into Jackson's biography when we talk about his presidency, he is not the kind of person who's ever going to run away from a battle. So Jackson basically assumes, or he institutes martial law in New Orleans, and he assumes command of the whole city. So not just the militia troops that he brought out of Tennessee and Kentucky, he basically places the entire city of New Orleans under his command. He assembles a larger force here made up of Tennessee, Kentucky militia. He's got some French pirates and even some freed slaves. So Jackson has a kind of a hodgepodge of men that make up his army. And this is just kind of there's even some Choctaw Indians that are part of his army. So Jackson has a very unconventional force assembled in New Orleans, and this is typical. Jackson is just he's one of those type of guys. He thinks outside the box. He's a fairly clever strategist, and when it comes to fighting, a lot of his experience, he's got a lot of experience in this area, so he's well prepared. He's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve. The British will eventually reach New Orleans in December of 1814. The British will bring about 7,500 soldiers into New Orleans, and they will. This main battle will take place about several miles downstream from the city of New Orleans. This is where Jackson set up his defense. Now, once the British arrive here, there's going to be several small skirmishes in the days before the main battle, but the main battle is going to take place January 8th, 1815. So it'll be a while between the time the British get here and the time the actual battle takes place. It's a little while. It just takes time to get things organized during this period. So what will happen is that Jackson has set up a position that forces the British to funnel into one specific area of this battlefield, and basically he's going to fight on his terms. He's got the river on one side of him, a swamp on the other side, and the only open approach to him is across an open field, and this is where the British will be forced to attack. So without getting into all of the really nitty-gritty of details of the battle, essentially what happens is that when the British make their full-scale assault on January 8th, they are going to be pretty much decimated by American artillery under the command of Andrew Jackson and his 5,000-man army. So we got about 7,500 British soldiers against 5,000 American soldiers, again made up of a lot of different groups of men. What will end up happening is, over the course of this battle, is that the British will end up suffering about 2,100 casualties compared to only about 70 casualties on the American side. So this is a very one-sided battle. And we'll take a look at a couple of illustrations here. This illustration here is showing this British Army, British troops assaulting Jackson's position here. Everything about this picture is incorrect. The artist who painted this picture, obviously a fan of Andrew Jackson, wishing to portray him in the most heroic light possible. In the actual battle, in the whole course of this battle, only one British soldier ever made it as far as Jackson's position. So this picture here showing all these British troops pouring over this wall here at Andrew Jackson's position, none of this actually happened. Only one British soldier ever made it this far. And this is due to mainly because so many British soldiers were killed during this battle, most of them from Jackson's artillery. And of course, a lot of the Tennessee and Kentucky militia A lot of these guys were expert marksmen, and they were picking off British officers from 200 250 yards away, and this helped to create a situation of chaos in the battlefield. Without this leadership, the soldiers' formations kind of fell apart. In fact, over the course of the battle, the British senior commander, as well as his second and third in command, were killed in the course of this battle. So again, this image is intended to portray Jackson as the hero of the day, which he was. U.S. victory at New Orleans was the result of Jackson's planning and leadership. So Jackson is technically the hero of the day, but a painting of Andrew Jackson fending off one British soldier doesn't look very heroic, and it doesn't really do much to celebrate this victory. So having Jackson face off against an entire British army in this illustration is much more heroic. Many other artists have explored this theme, and of course this is a different artist here, but you can see some of the similar elements. Jackson's army here, of course, his heroic pose, and this massive British army right on his doorstep here in this battle. Of course, we see the entire British Navy in the background, which of course was not present during this battle. So again, we see artists taking a lot of liberties with how these events are portrayed, in much the same way that media tends to exaggerate details of events today. Same thing happened back then. But Jackson is the hero of this battle. It was his plan, it was his leadership that enabled U.S. troops to win this very one-sided victory in the Battle of New Orleans. Now comes the really fascinating part of this battle. Despite this glorious victory, Andrew Jackson's army defeating a superior British army and taking very few casualties themselves, all of this that happened at the Battle of New Orleans ended up being almost irrelevant. The victory at New Orleans had no impact on the war, because by the time Andrew Jackson fought the British at New Orleans, the war had been over for 2 weeks. 2 weeks prior to this battle, U.S. and British delegations met in a small Belgian town of Ghent. And they met there to discuss a treaty that would bring an end to this War of 1812. This treaty was signed 2 weeks before the Battle of New Orleans took place. So the Battle of New Orleans had absolutely no impact on the end of the war. But what's ironic about this is that just given the flow of information during this period of history, people don't get information very, very quickly. It takes time for word to get around. The last orders that Andrew Jackson had received, and the same story for his British counterpart, the British general who was in charge of this battle, the last orders they were given were to fight. The British general was told to invade New Orleans. Andrew Jackson was told to defend New Orleans, and that was the last instructions that they were given. So they had no choice but to follow these orders. They had no idea that the war had already ended in the city of Belgium, in Ghent. So what makes this so peculiar, though, is that most Americans will read about the Battle of New Orleans in the newspaper before they hear about the end of the war as a result of the Treaty of Ghent. So in the minds of most of the American public, this glorious victory at New Orleans was the reason the war ended. Andrew Jackson, the hero of the nation, defeated the British at New Orleans, and that's what caused the end of the war. That's why the British wanted to make peace, because Andrew Jackson had defeated them at New Orleans, which of course is false. The war was already over by the time this battle took place. But we tend to form our opinions based on the information that we get, and the people in America, they receive this information in reverse order. They hear about the Battle of New Orleans, and then they hear about the end of the war. So that's how they assemble the information in their minds, and this story will become an American legend. Andrew Jackson will be elevated to status of national hero. He'll become a celebrity in the years that follow this. and a lot of this national notoriety will be part of what leads him into politics and eventually the presidency. And this Battle of New Orleans will become another one of those touchstone moments in American history. It will be woven into the fabric of our cultural narrative. It becomes legendary, and it's because of a mistaken piece of information. We, for many years, for many generations of Americans, will come to believe that the Battle of New Orleans was what brought about the end of the war, which, of course, is not correct. This Treaty of Ghent, a few details about it. Basically, all this treaty does is it ends the war. No territory is lost or surrendered or gained. No one is declared the victory or the victor or the loser. Basically, what happens here is that America and England sign this treaty and agree to stop fighting. They agree to return to the status quo antebellum. This is just a fancy Latin expression for we will put things back the way they were before the war started, as if the war never took place. So the Treaty of Ghent, basically the effect this has on American and British relations, it's as if the war never happened. It returns everything to the way it was before the war. And the reason they do this is because by the time we get to December 1814, many of the factors that had led to this war in the first place no longer existed. You remember we talked about impressment, the British attacks on our shipping and drafting our or forcing our sailors to fight in their navy. England no longer had a reason to do this because the war in Europe was over. With the war in Europe over, England no longer saw us as a threat. France had been defeated, so England had no longer had a reason to attack our ships. So all these factors that led to the war no longer existed. It was a moot point. So there's no reason to continue fighting. Plus, from England's perspective, they are worn out, literally, mentally, physically, economically. England is worn out from having fought so many years in this European war, and they have no desire whatsoever to continue fighting the Americans in this War of 1812. And as you might also suspect, America, again, as a small fledgling nation, we're not in any condition to continue a long, protracted war either. So both the Americans and the British are eager to reconcile this and get on with their lives, return everything back to normal, to get back to normal, put everything back the way it was before the war started, and resume normal relationships. And so this basically is what the treaty does. It doesn't identify either side as the winner or the loser. It just, we agree to stop fighting. And that's all this treaty does, is it just ends the war. So America doesn't gain any territory. England doesn't gain any territory. Nothing is lost or gained here. We just stop fighting. There are going to be complications, though, because while British and American negotiators are discussing this Treaty of Ghent, Federalists in Congress are having a secret meeting in Hartford, Connecticut. This Hartford Convention, as they call it. It's taking place at the same time that all this other stuff is going on. While the Jackson and the British are getting ready to fight in New Orleans, and the negotiators are getting ready to sign a peace treaty, the Federalists in Congress are having a secret meeting. And this, from their perspective, from the perspective of these Federalists in Congress, they don't know that the war is about to end. From their perspective, they think this war is going to continue on for who knows how long. And they've opposed this war from the very beginning. You remember when Congress declared war in 1812, the Federalists opposed it. They voted against it. But since they were the minority in Congress, they were overruled, and the war went on as planned. So all along, the Federalists have been opposing this war. Every chance they got, they expressed their opposition to this war. And this is no surprise. Remember, the Federalists, most of their constituents, the Federalists represent the interests of the New England states, the northern states, which are primarily involved in commerce and trade, mostly with England. So a war with England basically really it damages the economy of New England, these northern states represented by the Federalists. So the Federalists are opposed to a war with England for many reasons. And over the course of the war, they tried to resist as much as possible. Federal states that were controlled by Federalists in the North, they tried to resist by refusing to provide militia troops for the war effort, refusing to provide funds to support the war. A lot of a lot of merchants in these northern states, private citizens, they continued to trade with England under the table, despite the fact that Congress had passed a trade embargo against England. So they've done a lot in order to resist this war with England, and they've made no secret about it. They've voiced their opposition publicly on numerous occasions. This Hartford Convention, however, is a secret meeting. They did not publicize this meeting. It's at this point in December where they're trying to decide what their next move is going to be. Okay, we've tried to oppose the war all along, and it has failed. The war is still going on. It looks like it's going to continue on. What's our next move? How are we going to continue resisting the war? Some of the things that they discuss at this meeting, they discuss amendments to the Constitution to try to make it more difficult for Congress to wage this war. Some hardliners among these Federalists, the radicals, the hardliners, they're talking about secession. They said, okay, let's just have the northern states secede from the Union. That way we can make a separate peace with England, and we don't have to participate in this war any longer. Now, nothing that is discussed here in this Hartford Convention is technically treasonous. They don't do anything. They're just discussing options for their next move. No action is taken. They don't take any action at all at this Hartford Convention. They're just talking about what they might do in order to continue resisting the war. Of course, it all proves to be moot because in the course of their discussions, they get word that the war is over, and basically this whole convention is of no real consequence now. There's no need to resist the war anymore because it's over. But what happens is that this secret meeting becomes publicized. People hear about this, and when the public hear about what the Federalists were discussing at this secret meeting, namely secession, the American public is appalled. They can't believe that members of Congress would actually be discussing secession, which sounds like treason. So the Federalist Party loses a lot of credibility once this Hartford Convention is made known to the public. A lot of people see the Federalists as traitors and anti-American. People look at the Federalists and they say, how could you be opposed to the war? We won. We won the war thanks to Andrew Jackson. Remember, Andrew Jackson defeated the British at New Orleans, and that's what caused us to win the war. And you all look like a bunch of traitors for having opposed that. Keep in mind that this perception is based on inaccurate information. We didn't win the war. We simply agreed to stop fighting. If anything, the war was a draw. We won some victories, and the British won some victories, and it was kind of a stalemate. And both England and America, mutually agreed to stop the war and put everything back to normal. And Jackson's heroic battle had no impact on that at all. But that's not the way people saw it. The American people, they saw this heroic victories of Andrew Jackson and others. They saw this Treaty of Ghent as an American victory. And because of this, they tended to view the Federalists as traitors, as anti-American, betrayers of American nationalism. So it's because of this that the Federalists will lose all credibility. As a party, as a national party, the Federalists will more or less cease to exist after the War of 1812. They'll still remain active in local politics in some of the northern states, but as a national party, the Federalists will cease to exist because they lose all credibility as a result of this Hartford Convention. Keep in mind, the Federalists never actually did anything, but the fact that they were discussing these things makes them look very bad in the eyes of the American people. So let's talk a little bit about the aftermath. What is our takeaway from this War of 1812? Why is it important? Why is it in the history books? Because if you just look at the Treaty of Ghent, the War of 1812 appears to have no real significance. We fought the England for a couple of years, and then the Treaty of Ghent reset everything back to the way it was before the war, as if it never happened. So why is it important? For a couple reasons. The War of 1812, while we did not achieve anything in terms of grand strategy, we did not gain any new territory, we didn't lose any territory. It's important because there's going to be a lot of residual impact of this war that's going to linger on for quite a few years after the fact. First and foremost, the War of 1812 will mark the end of any kind of significant Indian resistance east of the Mississippi River. Now there, in the years after this, there's still going to be numerous Indians living in those eastern territories, those eastern states, but and there will be some minor skirmishes off and on in the years that followed. But in terms of significant organized resistance on the part of the Indians, it doesn't happen. There's no more significant resistance of the Indians east of the Mississippi River. Now, west of the Mississippi River, it's a different story, and we'll get more into that once we start talking about pioneers and the western expansion in the years that follow. But east of the Mississippi River is pretty much secure after this. There's no more Indian threat east of the Mississippi River after the War of 1812, and a large part of that was due to the Battle of the Thames and the death of Tecumseh, who was instrumental in organizing that resistance. Without his leadership, Indian resistance pretty much falls apart. And this is a big deal. It allows those few remaining territories east of the Mississippi to be settled very rapidly, and Americans on the frontier are more secure now. They're safer, free from Indian resistance, and we'll see a lot of those territories being settled into states very rapidly in the years that follow the War of 1812. Another collateral effect of the War of 1812 is that we will eventually get all of Florida from Spain. 1819, this is just a few years later after the war, Spain will offer to sell us the rest of Florida. Keep in mind, we gained a little bit of Florida in the year prior to the War of 1812. We kind of staged an uprising there and seized control of that part of that Florida Panhandle. Andrew Jackson seized another part of that Florida Panhandle during the war. Spain, keep in mind, Spain is still a relatively weak power in terms of the world power structure. Spain doesn't want any trouble with us. Their relationship with us in the past few years has suggested to them that if we wanted to, we could probably just take all of Florida, and Spain wouldn't really be able to do much about it. So in an attempt to avoid that situation and make some money in the process, Spain offers to sell us Florida in 1819. So by 1819, we will basically have a contiguous territory. Everything east of the Mississippi River will be in the possession of the United States. And part of this is as the result of the War of 1812. Our resistance to the British and our, of course, partly the actions of Andrew Jackson. Spain sees it as an opportunity to just make some money and avoid any further confrontation with us over Florida. We already kind of touched on this demise of the Federalist Party as a result of the Hartford Convention, and this is going to be important because it's going to reshape the American political climate. Without the Federalist Party opposing the Republican Party, Republicans in Congress are able to push their agenda forward relatively easily. There's not going to be a lot of political conflict that had characterized the years prior to the war. With two parties competing for control of Congress, a lot of debate, a lot of political bickering. Once the Federalists kind of break apart and no longer function as a national party, a lot of that competition and debate in Congress goes away for quite a few years that follow the War of 1812. So the political climate in America is relatively peaceful and smooth without the Federalist Party opposing the Republicans. Of course, we'll see eventually the Republican Party will eventually fracture and split in two, and we'll have a bipartisan situation like we did before, and the usual bickering and debates will resume. But for a few years after the war, there's relative peace in Congress because one of the parties has basically ceased to exist. Last thing on our list here is probably the most important, because in the years that follow the War of 1812, America is going to experience a phenomenal growth in terms of its economy. And a large part of that growth is going to come from industrialization. We're going to start seeing a lot of factories popping up, mostly in the north. The South still remains largely agrarian, but we're going to see the South expand its production, especially of cotton, in the years that follow. And cotton is going to be one of the big components that feeds into the first American industries. The Industrial Revolution begins in Europe in the late 1700s. So by the time we get to the War of 1812, the Industrial Revolution is already underway. In England, of course, since the Industrial Revolution began in England, England is the first to really benefit from industrialization. And we're talking about the emergence of machines, mechanization in terms of producing manufactured goods and so forth. So during the war, England is manufacturing a lot of things. Their industrial output is already going strong. But American industries are very small. We've got a few very small workshops and cottage industries. We haven't really gotten into full swing yet in terms of industrial production. Since we have a very strict trade embargo with England during the war, we're no longer able to import a lot of the things that we need, manufactured goods. Since we're not trading with England, and England is as our primary source of manufactured goods, the war kind of cuts us off from that. So our small fledgling industries are forced to pick up the slack. And so the War of 1812 creates a situation where American businesses and industries are forced to grow and become more self-reliant, and an American economy and industry gets kind of a jump start as a result of this War of 1812. It forces American industry to become a little bit more self-reliant. American businesses are more self-reliant because our lack of imports from England. We're able to start growing our own businesses and industries a little bit more rapidly. And after the war, that sets the stage for large-scale industrial growth as a result of this Industrial Revolution. Of course, once the war is over, we resume trading with England, and benefits of the Industrial Revolution from England begin trickling into the United States as well, and we'll see industrial growth really take off in those years that follow. So we're going to talk more about that next week, or I guess in the next session when we start talking about the Industrial Revolution. We'll get deeper into how that impacts the United States. But the War of 1812 helps to set the stage for the growth of American industrialization. And with the industrialization are going to come a whole bunch of other collateral effects that are going to affect every part of American society: political, economic, technological. Again, everything is going to be impacted by this Industrial Revolution. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. For now, though, we'll leave it off here, and we'll see you guys next time.